of the community. There we go. Good morning. I'll try this again. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for joining us. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact at the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. I actually have an easy job today. My job is to welcome you and thank you for joining us again for our Philanthropy Speaks podcast. And it's a chance for us to really focus on our work through the Pride Fund and talking about the policy landscape impacting the LGBTQ plus population. So as our organization started our equity journey, almost 5 years ago, we knew that this population was part of that journey, and we needed to make sure that they were inclusive in our grant making and in our donors. And so we established a Pride Fund. But I'm not going to go into detail. Again, as I said, my job was easy, and I am going to put you in the very good hands of Dale Weighill and some amazing speakers that we have. I want to thank Dale and our speakers for taking the time to join us as well. So thank you, Dale. It's great to see you. I am really just, you guys, even though I know you heard that, I'm turning it over to Dale, and believe I know that's scary, but you are in very good hands. He's going to walk us through this conversation and make sure that our panelists get to share their wisdom and experiences with us, again, for this very timely conversation. So with that, Dale, I'm just going to hand it right over to you. So thank you again, Dale. We appreciate it.
Of course, you're welcome. Thank you, Sue. For those of you that don't know, Sue and I have known each other for probably 20 years plus, a couple of decades, and more recently have connected around the work of the Community Foundation and its equity initiatives, not only related to racial justice, but also the cause of our conversation today, which is equity and equality for the LGBTQIA plus community. And so, thank you, Sue. I appreciate that. I'm happy to play the role of facilitator here, and I've got a couple of introductions to make. Let me just say one quick word about the Pride Fund before I do those introductions. So this was founded by Sue Peters, who you see before you, Sandra Murphy, who at one time worked for the Community Foundation of Greater Flint, is now happily retired, but still doing volunteerism in the community, and myself. And we raised over $50,000 through a variety of means over the past several years, and actually issued our first grant, albeit a small one, so that groups in the county here can make sure that LGBTQ people participated in the 2020 census, so that they were counted. One thing that the Pride Fund ultimately would like to do is not only support LGBT causes, but make sure we have a better understanding of how many people are in that group in our community and what their needs are. And so one of the important things is to make sure they got counted. So I'll just end by saying that if you want to make a donation to the Pride Fund, it's open to anyone who has a checkbook or a Visa debit card or what have you. And maybe we'll announce that later on or show them.
We sure can. And Dale, if I could just jump in, Sandra, who Dale mentioned, was the one who really she came to me and said, Sue, we are not getting donors coming in the door who want to support the population, but we are also not getting grant applications. So there's a lot more we can do. We know the folks are out there. We know there are needs. And so that was really the emphasis for creating the fund. So that's what we did, keeping up with Sandra. She wanted to make sure before she retired, this was in place, and she did it. Mm-hmm. And not only did she did it, but we're off to an amazing start. We met our initial goal of $50,000, but definitely want to double that. So it's still an opportunity to give, but in this space, really looking forward to our guests. I can tell from the green room conversation, they are willing to make good trouble, and I haven't even met them yet, so look out. So
I haven't either, so let's meet them now. How about that?
Yes, perfect.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Michaela Heffernan, who is the legislative director for State Representative John Cherry, whose district includes part of the city of Flint, but also stretches out into Flint Township and perhaps other locations that Michaela can mention in a minute. Michaela is not only legislative director for Representative Cherry, but she's an executive board member of the LGBTQIA plus organization in Lansing, which is called, I'm going to mispronounce it perhaps, but Solace. And that, as I understand it, that's Latin, and you can go into that as well. I also want to introduce Samara Howe, I believe is how it's pronounced. Samara is with the University of Michigan, Flint, the Center for Gender and Sexuality. And so I want to welcome both of you to this conversation today. and it's really nice to meet you. Michaela, I think we may have met before. You look somewhat familiar, but happy to see you here. And why don't we start out with, sort of the purpose of today, which is to talk a little bit about the public policy environment locally, statewide, and nationally around LGBTQIA issues. So I'm going to start with Michaela, given your role in the legislature. Tell us what's going on in Lansing, what you see on the horizon, and what Representative Cherry's trying to get done for our community.
Yeah, so honestly, I can start off with what happened yesterday at the Genesee County Board of Commissioners meeting. Dale, I know you were watching. I don't know if other folks were, but they voted on 3 resolutions at the Board of Commissioners meeting yesterday, one of which was to declare June as Pride Month. The other was to add sexual orientation and gender identity to the Equal Opportunity and Non-Discrimination Plan. And then the third was to adopt the Crown Act at a local level, which essentially provides for anti-discrimination clauses in regards to natural hair.
Right. Right. So tell us, a lot of people watching may not realize that these guarantees of non-discrimination aren't universal already, either in federal law, state law, local law. A lot of my friends who aren't close to this issue say, well, of course you shouldn't be discriminated against, and aren't LGBT people already part of non-discrimination laws? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and why it's necessary.
Sure. Right now in Michigan and in many states kind of across the country, LGBT protections are either not already in statute or are actively under attack. Michigan is one of at least 30 states that's introduced some discriminatory legislation, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit later. But on the plus side, there's also quite a few pieces of legislation, even here in Michigan, that would really support the LGBT plus population. One of which is Senate Bill 208 from Senator Moss, and then House Bill 4297 from Rep. Pohetsky. And those, and I think we're going to get into it a little bit later too, would actually add sexual orientation and gender identity or expression as protected categories under the Elliot Larson Civil Rights Act. So I'm very excited about those.
Right. And Elliot Larson, for those that may not be well versed, is the state Civil Rights Act that we have for state of Michigan. And as I understand it, it includes the categories that you would normally think of. So race and religion and gender, the basics, if you will, from sort of the 1964 Civil Rights Act at the national level. But we haven't added LGBTQIA folks to that yet. So it's part of the discussion and part of the struggle that we have going forward. I'm gonna tip over to Samara, who's been waiting patiently. And Samara, talk a little bit about your work at U of M Flint with the students and how that relates to some of the public policy issues, whether it's local, state, or federal.
Absolutely. So here at the Center for Gender and Sexuality at the University of Michigan Flint, we really seek to lead our campus in building awareness around some of these issues, right, that you're speaking of. So and really thinking about it as it relates to identity and at the intersections, right? So our goal is to support students who are a part of the LGBT plus community, survivors of gender-based violence or sexual violence, and also cisgendered women who are experiencing discrimination and harassment in the workplace, all these types of things. And so I think, critically, when I hear, Michaela, when you were speaking about these proclamations, they're so relevant to our students because they're coming to campus often for the first time, being able to safely explore their identities when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to gender, and in an affirming way, right? And also for students who may be potentially allies or supporters, I would say more. This is maybe their first time interacting in an environment, learning more and growing deeper in terms of understanding the community and some of the barriers that may be existing, particularly around safety and spaces. So it's exciting to me to know that there are these proclamations that are going forward, but it's also tells us that there's obviously still more work to do. And so we hope at the University of Michigan Flint to really encourage our students to become active and not only become aware, but are active. And what do we then do with this? What can we do? Action-oriented things, right? So we have a really robust peer education program. We also have a sexual assault advocate on our staff that's able to respond. So we do a lot of great work at CGS, I would say. And I'm really looking forward to expanding some of those services in the future.
That's wonderful. I'll say, I'm older than both of you, I think. And I was in grad school in 1995 to 97 and really wasn't out. And I went away to Washington, D.C., so I could be a little more open about who I was, or at least that's how I felt moving away from Michigan for a couple of years. And one evening I decided to risk it and go to a movie night in the LGBT Center at American University in DC. And I walk in and there was just 3 or 4 other people. So it was a little awkward, but that's one of the first steps I made to, trying to build community. And so I know, everything that you're saying, Samara, is hugely important. I appreciate your work at the college.
Yes, thank you, Dale. If I could add too, just, one of the things that's been a challenge for our students is that obviously COVID, and we have less housing, engagement with students right now, having to go back home. And so these are sometimes spaces where students have either been harmed or maybe do not have access to, resources or spaces where they can go to a movie night, or even where they can tap into some of the virtual weekly offerings that we have because of those issues. So you're absolutely right. I mean, those are some still things that are relevant to students right now in terms of finding community.
Right. Michaela, I wonder, so you mentioned legislation in Lansing. There's some positive legislation. It sounded like Senator Moss has a bill to amend Elliot Larson, but then there's some negative legislation, probably more than one piece of negative legislation. I know there's concern among some about transgender people participating in athletics and all of that. So maybe if you could go through those 2 things for us so the viewers know more about them.
Sure. So I think one of the bigger ones that we're seeing, and one of the more harmful ones, is Senate Bill 218. That was introduced by Senator Tice. It essentially creates a requirement that high school athletes can only compete for a position on and compete on a high school team that matches their biological sex. So the sex that they were assigned at birth is the team that they must play on, no matter what their gender identity is. It was actually co-sponsored by 12 other senators, all of which were Republican, if I'm not mistaken. And the sad thing is that more than 20 states have introduced very similar legislation. And in something that will come as no shock to anyone, in almost every case, none of these sponsors can cite a single instance in which that participation has caused an issue.
Right. It's almost, a lot of these things, the animosity can be built on urban legends, and I think it seems to me, it's a deliberate attempt to use a wedge to try to drive, there's a lot of folks who I think are sympathetic and don't want to discriminate against LGBTQIA people, including the trans community. But these gentlemen and maybe some women state senators on the Republican side seem to think that this is an issue where they can get some political traction. So that's unfortunate. But what about the Elliot Larson piece and Senator Moss and what are the chances, do you think, of that happening?
I'm not a gambling person, so I won't put any chances on it. Frankly, looking at the fact that Senator Moss and Representative Lgbtqia are both in the minority party, they're both in the Democratic Party, I don't see it passing anytime soon. We've had some pretty good movement on it. I think just yesterday, the Flint and Genesee Chamber came out in support of the Fair and Equal Michigan campaign, who are essentially behind the campaign to get this amendment to the Elliot Larson Act on the ballot for 2022.
Right. So there's a couple different options. One is what the senators are trying to do through the legislative process, but then there's also the possibility of amending it through a ballot proposal at the state level. What's the status of that campaign and what election are they trying to work toward for that?
As last I checked, Fair and Equal Michigan had submitted their signatures in October 2020, and we're waiting certification from the Secretary of State. They may have already gotten that. I'm not entirely sure. But if those signatures are deemed valid, the legislature then has a chance to take it up or pass on it. And if they pass on it, it will go to the voters on the 2022 ballot.
I see. So fall of next year, November of 2022, potentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is.
And we're kind of assuming the legislature won't act on it, given the majorities are probably not in favor. Is that right?
That's true. I'm really quite hoping that it will end up on the ballot. If we're looking at polling data, a majority of Americans, a majority of Michiganders, even those who lean Republican or who lean conservative, support these types of additions, support transgender rights, support LGBT plus rights.
Okay. Samara, would you talk a little bit, one of the reasons the Pride Fund was started and the Community Foundation as a philanthropic organization is interested in the Pride Fund and helping this community is based on the needs of folks. And I'm guessing, you've got a lot of services at U of M through your office, and you have a lot of people walking in and out. You mentioned some of them, but can you give us a flavor of what you think, based on what you see, the greatest needs of the LGBTQIA community are? And maybe they're all across the board, but I'd be interested in your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, I think these needs are not new that I'm going to share with you, but I think it's certainly been exacerbated as many things given the pandemic. So I think about mental health needs. And, one of the things we know, particularly within the LGBT plus community, is that they're at higher risk of experiencing depression, higher risk of suicidal ideation, and even attempts, right? And so thinking about ways in which we can build communities, again, safety, again, where folks don't have feel isolated or like by themselves, and not having that support is really critical. We know that social isolation plays a big role in, I think, again, in some of those kind of negative coping. And so we really want to be sure that we're supporting and offering mental health support from places that, again, are affirming places, therapists that are familiar with working with the community and are supportive of the community. I think too, one of the things that we deal with often is financial need and finding safe housing. So we mentioned, particularly within the transgender and gender nonconforming community, where are the spaces where folks can go for emergency housing in our county, for instance, in our community. And also thinking too about physical health care, right? So just thinking to just a recent conversation I had with a student trying to find spaces where they can access hormone replacement treatment. And in our county, it's really, after doing some digging, there's Hamilton Clinic in our area, or we are encouraging students to go to Ann Arbor to their facility, and who has the resources to go all the way to the University of Michigan Hospital, the amazing clinic out there, but still, like, where are the resources here? So I think there are lots of different needs, I would say, but those are just, a couple. And then too, just kind of to pick up feedback on what Michaela mentioned earlier about just really the climate. So thinking about the ban, right, on athletic, that transgender students can't, be on athletic teams, is really just a fear-based kind of at its core, right? And so how do we then shift the climate so that culturally we're not having this kind of fear-based reaction? We're often teaching around the differences between sex, biological sex, and gender identity and gender expression. And really, it's interesting to me how often this may be their folks' again first time realizing those terms are different and not the same. Right. So I think we're dealing with a lot of things systemically, and also educating folks. Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack in what you've said. I have a background in the nonprofit sector here in the community, and know that we have a lot of nonprofits in Flint, public agencies, but also nonprofits. We don't lack for that. And there are the housing organizations and organizations that serve the homeless and mental health care. But it does occur to me that what you said about the scarcity of maybe competence around serving LGBTQIA people is really not there. And so one of the reasons the Pride Fund was established is so that well-intentioned organizations that want to build their competence in serving those types of folks can apply for grants eventually and get dollars that allow them to do that. You know, think about it. If you're a trans person in particular and you're homeless, you know, are you going to want to walk into a shelter, which is not a welcoming space? The staff hasn't been trained, and you're fearing for your life because you don't know what the environment's going to be like. So it is it's a critical need in this community that we make people more aware, but that we also build capacity in these nonprofits to serve people. So, and I think that's exactly what you said. Michaela, speaking of nonprofits, I didn't even intend to segue there, but this is like the perfect segue. So you are on the board of a nonprofit, taking off your legislative hat, Michaela, but switching to the nonprofit that you help with in Ann Arbor, Lansing, sorry. Tell us a little bit about that and, you know, what the organization does and the needs that you serve for folks.
So the Solace Center was founded in 2017. And like Dale said, Solace is Latin for wellness and well-being. We are currently closed to the public because of COVID-19. We are talking about reopening. We are really hoping to reopen. We actually are the only LGBT plus resource center in Lansing. And we're a hub for the population. We have, I want to say it's over 17 different groups who actually use our center to meet or use our center as a hub for their activities. We are currently searching for next executive director. So, you know, if anybody's interested, solacecenter.org/careers. But Solace it's wonderful. I walked in for my first time. I just moved to Lansing, just bought a house here, just kind of was putting down roots, and I was immediately welcomed. And I've been with Solace since 2018 at this point. I walked in for the first time at our very first birthday celebration. And it's been wonderful since. The amount of support, the amount of community, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and you were then recruited to join the board.
Yes, my partner actually.
If you show interest in something in a nonprofit, they're going to recruit you to do something.
Yes, my partner essentially went. You know, she has experience with nonprofit work and grant writing and legislative stuff, and they went, "Oh, really?" And now I'm on the board. But. Yeah, it's really quite fantastic.
If you so we were listening to what Samara was saying about the needs for the community that she serves here in Flint and Genesee County through the University of Michigan. But are there similar needs in Lansing? Are they different? Is there anything that maybe she didn't reference that you've seen that's important that our viewers know about?
Honestly, I think she said it all. Lansing has a pretty high population of transgender or gender nonconforming folks, and we also have a pretty high population of homeless folks or folks that don't have stable housing, and it's very dangerous. It's dangerous for anyone to be living on the streets for a variety of reasons, but especially so if you are transgender or nonconforming or otherwise identify with the LGBT plus community.
Yeah. We do have a question in the chat, and it is, what can allies do? So non-LGBTQ people, what can they do to help your work in particular, either legislatively or at the U of M, Flint, or with the nonprofit in Lansing? What can people who want to be supportive do? So let's start with Samara.
Right. So I think through our center, there are a few ways in which we have scholarship funds for our students, but we are in need of financial support to continue to build those out. So I would encourage you to check out our website or contact our office to find out how you can support in those ways. And I think too, just really in terms of allyship, really just being I would say sensitive to the needs of the community, and really allowing the community to be the one to identify you as a supporter, as an ally, right? So sometimes we kind of step into that role and that title, but it's really an action and also a recognition that the community can give to you. And doing that by really boots on the ground, like advocacy work, like coming to like the Solace Center. Just a few years ago, I was there at a Transgender Day of Remembrance, right? So being present, like showing not only kind of in word, but also where are you exposing yourself to opportunities to engage in conversation? Are you challenging people one-to-one, with certain comments that are harmful and hurtful, right? Language. And really too, like finding out where you're locally, if it's here in Lansing or in Flint or wherever in our community where you can get involved, right? Maybe become a board member like Michaela, but getting involved, I think, is really key.
Okay, wonderful. Michaela, what would you suggest for people who are allies?
I want to again restate being involved, but education is a really big one. Not only educating yourself as an ally, but helping to educate others. There is a great deal of labor that is put on marginalized communities to explain themselves, to educate. And the best thing that you can do as an ally of those communities, whoever they are, is to know what's going on, know about the legislation, speak out about it, speak up, and of course donate. It's always helpful to have the funds to make sure that centers keep running and that our resources are available.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I picked up from both of you, I mean, Michaela, you said educate yourselves if you're an ally, and Samara, you didn't quite put it this way, but allies need to listen and understand maybe before talking too much. I'll say this about myself. I like to think I'm an ally for people of color, and I'm always trying to be intentional about stepping back first and just listening and giving space to others so that they can tell their stories and share their truth before I don't want to dominate. And it's well-intentioned a lot of the time, as you probably know, but it's important for people to educate themselves on terminology and the history of all this. So I appreciate that. One of the things that I saw yesterday that allies did, I was on the Zoom for the county commission meeting that Michaela talked about, where the 3 resolutions were on their docket. And there were probably 30 to 40 speakers there that were in favor of those non-discrimination resolutions. There were some people in opposition, but the people that were in favor seriously outnumbered the others. And I would say that at least half were allies, or as far as I can tell, were allies, and from the people that I know. And them being alerted to the fact that there was non-discrimination, civil rights language, promoting Pride Month, the flying of the Pride flag, and then adding LGBTQIA to the non-discrimination policy for the county, learning about that and showing up, filling out a slip to speak. I mean, that's hugely important. It really is. And Michaela, from your perspective, it seems like we've taken care of that to a degree at the local level with the county, but tell us how allies can help at the state level or with the ballot initiative after it gets on the ballot in promoting amendments to the Elliot Larson Civil Rights Act. Your
best thing is to call. Call your senators, call your representatives, call the governor's office, tell them that you support pro-LGBT plus legislation. We have, a good dozen bills or so up that would help protect, help educate, help do a lot of different things, and they need the support. If you don't know who your senator or your representative is, you can visit house.mi.gov and you can find out there who your representative is. The Senate website, I believe, is senate.michigan.gov. I may be wrong, and find out there. But being open, being somebody who is communicating this and letting them know that support is out there is very important. Okay, we're getting other chats here with questions. So
let's shift our focus for a minute. And I know that neither of you build yourselves as experts on federal legislation, but let's see. This is like quiz time to see what you might know is going on. I know enough to be dangerous. So the Equality Act passed the U.S. House of Representatives with, I think, almost all, if not all, Democratic votes, and then a couple of Republicans maybe a month and a half ago. And Dan Kildee has been great on that. We had asked him to be part of this panel, but he's engaged in committee work in D.C. today. But tell us, how important is that at the federal level? Can you describe, if you know, what elements are in the Equality Act, and what the chances are for that to pass? I know President Biden supports it, but it sounds like the Senate may be a block on it. Raise your hand if you want to go first. Who wants to go on this one?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So the Equality Act did pass the House of Representatives. I'm very hopeful that it will pass the Senate as well. That bill specifically prohibits discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in areas including public accommodations and facilities, education, federal funding, employment, housing, credit, and even the jury system. Again, these are things that a lot of people don't realize that it's still an issue.
Right.
I said, I'm very...
Yeah, I was going to say, so when you think about it, 1964 Civil Rights Act, one of the seminal pieces of civil rights legislation in this country for people of color, it covered a lot of those things, right? Accommodations and education and other things. And the average person believes that that's also right now covering the LGBTQIA community, when in fact it isn't. And people are fighting against covering the community, right?
Yes, there is active fighting against the community, and it's active legislation. Don't quote me directly, but there are more than 200 anti-LGBT plus bills that have been introduced across the country. And of those, 120 or so directly target the transgender population, and about half of them actually have to deal with the same thing as Senate Bill 218, which is the anti-transgender kids in sports.
Right. Samara, do you want to weigh in on federal, whether it's the Equality Act or anything else at the national level of importance? I know that you do advocacy work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, all these acts that have been coming forward have been helpful, but also in practice is some things that, remains to be seen, right? So we know that the laws was passed to that anti-discrimination against LGBTQ folks by their employer, that they can no longer have that. But for instance, I was just talking with a student who is not non-gender conforming and presents very, in terms of gender expression, more masculine, but had nail polish on, and the employer told them that was unprofessional. And so thinking of what, and they're just kind of taken aback by it. But these are the kind of the things that, these are folks in positions that have power, right? And so even though the laws are passed, really, universally, what's happening in practice is that people are still feeling and are experiencing harassment and discrimination, for instance, in the workplace. Interestingly enough, and one of the things that we're doing at our campus, right near next to our office, we're working to have an all-gender restroom right next to my office, when historically it has not happened. And I made it my business during my first year. I'm going to be 1 year in at U of M Flint, just in one more month or so. But I couldn't believe that. And so what's the holdup? Why don't we have kind of basic things as it relates to advocacy surrounding the LGBT plus community? So right. Those are some things that I think, again, in practice, how do we then apply some of these things that are happening legislatively?
Right. There is a certain irony not to have an all-gender bathroom next to the Center for Gender Sexuality, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting the way that happens. I'll say at Mott College, where I work for my day job, we are just now installing as a matter of standard practice, gender neutral or all gender bathrooms, so that people can feel comfortable. We had a panel of students speak at our Board of Trustees meeting maybe a year and a half ago when we were pre-COVID and in person, and we had non-binary and trans students talk about how they literally had to think through the schedule of classes in their mind before going to the campus, and literally think about, when will I be able to take a bathroom break? Because I'm going to be in this building for this class, and I know there's not a bathroom in there that I can go into and feel safe. And,
Absolutely.
and to have that, I mean, one or both of you have talked about sort of the mental or emotional weight of being a marginalized person carries. And that's a real example of it, where it's on your mind constantly, right? And I sat there as a gay white man filled with a certain amount of privilege, certainly the privilege to go into a bathroom because I identify as a white male, and do whatever I need to do without worrying about the building I'm going to be in and whether there's going to be a place for me to use a restroom. So it when I listened to that, it really broke my heart. But we're moving forward at the college with trying to repair that deficit. So let's see, we've got a couple other questions here. First of all, I want to give a shout out. I mentioned at the beginning of our podcast today that the Pride Fund had given out one grant, and that was to wellness. I didn't mention what organization received it, but wellness is something that I've been supporting for a long time. They were in the trenches when nobody else was in the trenches in the 1980s. 90s and 2000s up to the present. And Stevie Atkins is a really close friend of mine. She's the executive director of that organization. And, their ostensible mission is around HIV and AIDS, but they have really done a tremendous amount of work for LGBTQIA, safe space. And it's really something important to support. So for you allies out there that, want to support an organization that is in the city, in the county here, wellness could really use your help, either as volunteer, board member, or certainly as a donor. And they were the ones that did the work around the census with the grant from the Pride Fund to try to make sure LGBTQIA people were counted, and so that we could track that more effectively. Let's see, Michaela, what else is going on at the state level, or even in Lansing, that city of Lansing, that you would want us to know about? Related to either policy or legislation, or things that you see coming down the pike?
So I'm going to start out with a fun fact, actually, that I'm really quite proud of. The House of Representatives office building, where all of the reps have their offices, unless they're in the Capitol, has on every floor with offices gender neutral bathrooms, all gender bathrooms, 2 of them. And when I started working here and discovered that, it was fantastic. I was thrilled. Other state legislation, we have a Senate bill. Senator McMurrow introduced Senate Bill 367, which would prohibit conversion therapy for children. House Bill 4551 from Rep. Rogers would prohibit insurers from denying coverage based on gender identity, or sexual orientation. I'm pretty sure that Representative Brayback introduced a companion bill to Senator McMurrow's bill that would also prohibit conversion therapy for children. There's really quite a lot going on with the issue of just, it's stalled. It's not moving.
And that boils down to not having, if I can be political about it, the Democrats are the minority in the state Senate, minority in the state House of Representatives. We have the governorship. The Democrats have the governorship. But it's that's only one piece of the puzzle, and you can't pass legislation unless you have a majority in those 2 chambers, right? And are there no Republicans that are willing to cross the aisle to be of help to Democrats who want to support the LGBTQIA community?
I don't know. I honestly would have to look at the co-sponsorship list and see who else signed on to support these bills. Like you said, it's tough being in the minority. It's very important for everyone to get out and vote.
Right.
I will say that it's nice having the governor being the minority party, and as she has the ability to veto bills, which would then require a 2/3 override by the legislators to override that veto.
Right.
So it makes it a little bit better, but in reality, we have kids, we have transgender kids looking at their TV, looking at the internet and saying, people don't like me, people hate me, people want to ostracize me.
Right.
And that's a problem. At the end of the day, they are children, and it's our job to protect them.
Right. For people watching, and this is to either of you, tell us about conversion therapy and what it's designed to do for people that may not be familiar with it, and why it's important to outlaw that. Either one, Samara?
Yeah. So I think the therapy has had an interesting history, particularly when it relates to the LGBT plus community, and the sexuality was really pathologized in the mental health, I would say, arena. And so additionally, in the DSM-4 or earlier versions of the DSM, it was a diagnosis. It was diagnosable. And so you kind of giving that as a kind of the foundation piece. When we talk about conversion therapy, it's really has this kind of the same approach, and it being correct to correct something is kind of at its origin. So it's kind of, and it also has some underpinnings as it relates to faith and religion. So there are some ministries out that are designed to convert or to change someone's sexuality, and it's very detrimental to the community, particularly for children, and when you're thinking about their development. And so when they're experiencing, as you're saying, Michaela, those environments where they're not unwanted, or there's something somehow deviant or wrong with me, what messages that happens, how that can be destructive, really, even at the neurologically, right? Like how our children are dealing with that. So it has some very damaging effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can be re-traumatizing to a young person when really it was supposed to not do that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of people who know that they're gay, don't want to be gay because of culture and their marginalized family, friends ostracizing them. So they pursue a conversion therapy situation, which makes their mental health even worse. And maybe they feel like they've changed. Sometimes that's only temporary, and then they quote go back to being who they are. And it's just I can't imagine having to go through all that. The roller coaster of it all in terms of what it does to your mental health and the people that you hold close to you. It's just a shame. So Michaela, you mentioned the one bill. I don't know if there's any more detail around that, but I know other states have adopted conversion therapy bans. I think California, maybe last year, the year before. And what do you think is there any momentum behind that bill in Michigan? And have there been any horror stories about it presented to the legislature so that you can persuade people?
I think, frankly, any story about it is a horror story. But that is definitely my personal opinion. I don't know. That is quite honestly one of the hardest parts about my job, either in the legislature or as a Solace Center board member. We don't know what's going to move. We don't know if we can get a bill that supports the LGBT plus community to move. And that goes back to being the minority party. It's why it's so important for folks to be out and to vote.
Right. I'll say I know a gentleman named Frank Foster who was a state representative from Traverse City area, a Republican, really good guy, like him a lot. He's now a lobbyist and works in part for Mott College, which is how I met him. But he was in the House of Representatives as a Republican, and he voted to support, the last time Elliot Larson came to the floor, he was, I think, maybe the only Republican to vote to add LGBTQIA protections to the state law. And he was then primaried in a Republican primary by someone who didn't appreciate his support for non-discrimination, and he was defeated in a Republican primary. And so part of this, and this is a whole nother show perhaps, but gerrymandering and the fact that districts are either very, very conservative or very, very liberal can lend itself to extremes being elected or nominated in a primary and then elected in a general election, which may not reflect or probably doesn't reflect the balance of opinion in the state. I think that Michigan is a pretty fair state overall, with people wanting equity and equality. As you said, Michaela, at the beginning, people don't want to harm others and discriminate on balance. But when you draw the lines in legislative districts so that extremes, especially on the the side that wants discrimination for whatever reason, they get elected, and then they can block things, or put things forward that are hazardous, proactively. Let me ask you, this is more of a personal question, but what brought you, where do you get your passion for this work? I mean, clearly both of you have passion around this. And to me, that usually comes from a real personal place, so you can decide how much you want to share. But I think it's important for people watching to know what motivates you to do this great work. So let's start with Samara.
Sure. Well, I've shared this often with my students as a person who isn't a part of the LGBT community, but also very early on saw how largely Black gay men in my community were treated early years, particularly in the faith community. Those are kind of foundational for me. And then also having a member of my family come out and also be treated in an interesting, very unsupportive way. And so I watch her still negotiate some of parts of her identity in really in secret. And so those are things that really are motivating for me. Obviously, my students who are amazing and who bring things forward. But I would say personally and professionally, this is something that I'm passionate about, and really just instilling that folks should not be harmed is a huge piece for me, a mantra. Like, how do I help to create a community, a safe community for all folks in our county and around our world?
Yeah, right on. I love it. Michaela?
Well, as a part of the LGBT plus community, I obviously have a bit of a vested interest in this. It doesn't sit well with me that, I could be fired for being gay. I could be tossed out of housing. I couldn't be allowed to marry for quite some time. There's a lot going on. But ultimately, humanity is just this gorgeous, amazing, creature as a whole. There's so many different facets to us. There's so many different identities. And the fact that we can discriminate against one or the other, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't make sense. And frankly, it's mean. And I don't think that's what we should be telling our kids.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'll say, obviously I'm a gay man, and and there's a million things that have probably happened to me, some that I remember, some that I don't, right? You walk through life and things hit you. But one of the reasons why I felt it was important for the Pride Fund, and this was probably a good 6 or 7 years ago, there was a story on MLive about a kid, a teenager, high school student in Linden, who killed himself. And he committed suicide because he was rejected by at least some of his family and some friends at Linden High School. And, I remember when I was first in Flint, I was substitute teaching at some of the high schools when I was just starting to get my legs under me and working. I was teaching part-time at Mott College in political science and, subbing to make some money in my late 20s. And invariably, the classrooms I was in, the male students especially, their pejorative for other male students was FAG all the time, just constantly. And I don't know that I ever corrected them on that, or I might have just said, shouldn't say that, but how much can you take, right? over and over and over. And so I think about that young man in Linden who killed himself, and that's part of the inspiration for me to want the Pride Fund to help people in his situation. What about, there's another question here that we've got in the chat: resources for people, either through where you all work or volunteer, or just that about in the community or nationally even. If people want to know more about LGBTQ rights and just even the basic resources that people can take advantage of. Samara?
Sure. There are a few that come to my mind kind of right away, particularly what relates to youth. So the MOASH in our in Michigan is a great resource for young people who want to get involved in advocacy rights around sexual health and sexuality. The Trevor Project nationally is another organization that supports youth within the LGBT plus community. Obviously PFLAG for families, affirmations. There are lots of places I would kind of come to mind in Michigan.
Right.
I would say our office for sure. We serve students primarily, but also will support the community and getting connected. If it's medical services, if it's like we work very closely with wellness services as well. It's an amazing organization. But we really seek to do what we can in our corner in our county. So please do feel free to reach out to us, even though we're working remotely. We will connect you.
Samara, would you read out loud for us your email address and your phone number in case people want to reach you?
Sure. My email address is S as in Sam, A as in Apple, M as in Mary, A as in Apple, R as in Ruth, A as in Apple, L as in Larry, W as in Wick, at umich.edu. That's how you can reach me directly. We're kind of working remotely, so I can give you a phone number, but it's not something that I would get right away. But certainly I can give you our crisis number if you email me.
Okay, wonderful. Michaela, your shot at the question about resources and what you know about, and maybe give your contact information too.
Sure. So right off the top of my mind, because we did mention it, the struggle to find healthcare professionals who are queer educated is pretty rough. There is a resource called Queering Medicine. And it is quite Lansing, kind of Ingham County focused, but they're putting together a list of medical professionals who are educated, who are known and have said, I am gay friendly, I am trans friendly, I am you can come to me, I'm a safe space.
Right.
The other thing I would say is MSU has a pretty good LGBT plus resource center. I know I hung out there quite a bit when I was at MSU. Very welcome, very friendly, and they have a lot of different resources. If you're looking at legislation specifically, Michigan has a website called legislature.mi.gov that you can visit. And you can actually track certain keywords or certain legislation like the ones I talked about today. If you want to keep track of Senate Bill 218 and see what happens, you can get email updates. Kind of at a national level, ACLU, Human Rights Campaign, HRC, those are good folks to kind of keep an eye on. You can sign up for action alerts from them and from a bunch of other folks. The State Innovation Exchange, it's called SIX. SIX. They have quite a good amount of newsletters and stuff, and they tend to be easy to digest. So you don't have to be a policy wonk or, have, your PhD to understand it.
Okay. And did you give your contact information, Michaela?
No, I didn't. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my contact information is going to be MIKAYLAH at Solace, SALUS Center.org. And again, we are out and about. So a phone number is not the best way to get to me. I would definitely say shoot me an email. I can link it at any of those resources that I just talked about. And yeah, and if you're ever in Lansing, check us out.
Okay. So one last thing, I was thinking about resources, and I imagine that U of M Flint, like Mott College, has policies that are pretty robust in terms of non-discrimination. Now, the question is whether they're really enforced and all that. But in terms of language, the kind of thing that the county adopted yesterday and that we want to add to the Elliot Larson Act, are there resources if someone's watching this right now and they own a business or they work in an organization and they don't have those protections? Are there places where they can find that kind of language to bring to the attention of their human resources office or the head of their company, or if they're the owner, that they can download and maybe put in their handbook, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. What comes to mind is at the beginning of this year, we were able to solidify our diversity, equity, and inclusion statement at our campus. And so we have been a part of the creation of that from the center, really focusing and prioritizing gender and sexuality as a part of that. Often we talk about race primarily, but we want to be sure that we're elevating again those voices. And so I would say taking a look at our DEI statement. Also within often college campuses across everywhere did some modifications to their Title IX. And so for us, we have with the University of Michigan, we have a sexual misconduct policy. So I would say for businesses, it would be helpful to have that outlined in terms of any kind of harassment that may occur, that not even outside of sexual assault, but any form of harassment, no matter what your gender identity or expression is, having some language around where folks can get support, who is that person in HR, like all the things, making sure that that's outlined. Unfortunately, I've certainly heard of times when folks have been harmed in the workplace, and so being able to have language that's inclusive there and very clear in terms of where people can get confidential support. That's great.
I know that the Mott, our college, if you go to mcc.edu and look for the policy section, probably, I'm assuming it's under About Us, you should find our DEI policies and non-discrimination if anyone's interested in taking a look at those. And those we recently updated to add gender identity and gender expression as categories that we don't abide any discrimination against those folks. So, well, we are at almost an hour, and I could go on. When the pandemic's over, I would like to have a drink with you, ladies. Can we do that somehow? I know Sue will be in. I know Sue Peters will be in that.
Yeah. Hey, he's Cosmos for me, but that's our ongoing joke. So
let me quickly say thank you to the Community Foundation for their work and for making this platform available, this podcast platform, so that Philanthropy Speaks. Is that do I have?
Yes, it sure is. You have it right.
And making it available to us and our guests, and so we can get the message out. So I'll turn it back over to Sue.
Yeah, well, and I want to thank you, Dale, Michaela, and Sam. The insights and information that you provided are invaluable to us. You challenged me to get back out of my bubble. 2-mom family here. We have twin boys who are 9, and we're really just trying to get through 3rd grade math and make sure we don't forget the lunchbox, right? So sometimes it's easy to get yourself in a bubble and forget about how much of a fight there still is. And after yesterday, there's a certain county commissioner that I hope understands that we are just another family trying to make our way through, and that folks vote differently. That's just a small public plug. But because I tell you, what we believe in at the Community Foundation is that there should be no hierarchy of human value. And that's where equity comes in. We really need to respect each other, have those conversations, understand our differences. Feel very fortunate, again, that the Community Foundation is willing to take that platform. Thank the board, Isaiah, and the staff for all of that. And again, just want to thank you. I figure if my 2 Catholic aunts, the nuns, could find a way to wrap their head around me and still love me and the boys and my wife, there's a way that we can do more. And I know that you guys have laid a great platform for us to start doing more. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.